is for a general audience. It isn't something that is particularly faith-based in the language that it uses or the references that are cited. No, it's let's live life better, and here's some possible thoughts to throw in the hopper and see what you think. So, as long as I keep it that way, every once in a while I am told people want to know something personal, like show me holding a grandkid or something like that. But I'm glad I'm there. Thank you for joining me. Thanks, Andrew Kruchek, for all you do at that end in Ann Arbor. And I thank you people for the company. Walk with God to infinity.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
A beacon of truth in a troubled world. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
The Guadalupe Radio Network has kept the promise for 25 years. In the year 2000, we promised to use our network to promote holy vocations to the priesthood and religious life. Since then, we've consistently encouraged men and women to be open to God's call to holy vocations in service to the Church. The Guadalupe Radio Network's Keeping the Promise 25th Anniversary Celebration will be Saturday, July 19th at the Plano Event Center in North Texas.
Have you ever heard an aviation emergency on the news? You hear the pilot and ATC talking, but what do you miss? The pilot asking their aircraft dispatcher what they should say on the radio to sound cool. Aircraft dispatchers are the problem solvers working at the airline's operations center. My wife and I run Aircraft Dispatcher Training Center in Farmers Branch. Thanks to the amazing program here at the GRN, we have become Catholic and now sponsors of this great station.
Join us in praying to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mystical Rose, make intercession for Holy Church. Protect the Sovereign Pontiff. Help all those who invoke you in their necessities. And since you are the ever-Virgin Mary and Mother of the true God, obtain for us from your most holy Son the grace of keeping our faith, of sweet hope in the midst of the bitterness of life, of burning charity, and the precious gift of final perseverance. Amen.
What was I going to do with a baby?
I was too young to be a mother.
They said I had a choice.
The timing was all wrong.
I had hopes and dreams for my life.
They said it would be the best thing for me to do.
So why do I regret my decision every single day?
Where did all of my hopes and dreams go?
I've never felt so alone.
Why won't the shame go away?
They said it would be easy. It isn't.
Don't suffer alone. Call 214-544-CARE or go to racheldallas.org.
Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of Back to the Father. It is May 2nd, 2025, and this is a program where we laser focus on a particular teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas in his famous Summa Theologica, which I have a great devotion to and have really spent about the last 15 years of my life studying it pretty closely, and I enjoy it very much. And so in this program, we take a pretty deep dive into these topics. And if this is something that you find interesting as well, we invite you to tune in every single week that we do the show and participate, comment, ask questions, and, just kind of be part of this conversation. And so I always kind of drag Sissel Anderson into it. She doesn't have a choice. She is the producer of this program. And so she kind of, over these years, has kind of been brought into the conversation about these various topics of the Summa. The Summa is pretty big. It's 5 volumes, covers everything you can imagine having to do with the Christian faith, from God to the angels, the human nature, the life of virtue, the laws, sacraments, Jesus Christ, the incarnation, the death and resurrection of Christ, and then the last things as well of death and heaven, hell, judgment. And so if you are interested in the Christian faith, other than Holy Scripture itself, I don't know of any other better resource to learn about the treasured teachings of our Catholic faith than the Summa Theologica. The last few weeks, we have been doing a dive into various teachings by St. Thomas Aquinas on the Holy Eucharist. And I was very inspired to do this because the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. It's the height, it is Jesus himself. And I think it's a really interesting mystery that Jesus Christ could be contained, body, blood, soul, and divinity, in something that looks like, bread and wine. And it's a great mystery. And it's something that I don't know if we really contemplate enough. And so that's what we're going to be doing in this particular program, is talking about question 77 of Tertia Pars, which is the third part of the Summa Theologica. And the title of the article of the question is "The Accidents Which Remain in This Sacrament." Okay, the accidents which remain in the sacrament. I'm going to ask Sissel here in a moment what comes to her mind when she thinks of accidents, and not like car accidents or that kind of thing, or accidents has a lot of different meanings. But when it comes to the Eucharist, it has a very specific meaning. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But before that, and before I bring Sissel in, I just want to talk about 5 approaches that we can have as people when it comes to the Eucharist. And I'm going to go from what I consider to be the worst approach to the best approach. So so I'm going to go ahead and bring you in a little bit early. So what would be, in regard to the Eucharist, what would be the very worst approach that a person could have to it? I mean, even think of like an extreme position.
So so just what they think about it,
just kind of an approach to that.
That it's, what would be the worst? Ooh,
I mean, we're talking about worst. I mean,
I would say them just thinking that it's, that you should disrespect. I'm trying to think to disrespect the Eucharist. I was trying to think of something the most extreme I could think of, because everything I think about is actual actions and not thinking. Yeah. But I guess just say, I got it. You have no thought about it. That you're very
apathetic.
Apathetic. Yeah.
Okay,
that's what I'm going to say is the worst. I don't know if that's the worst, but I just think that's pretty.
That's a good thought, because I was thinking about, is that, when I tell you what I think the worst is, you're going to think, well, I think apathy would probably not even be as bad as that. But I think the worst one would be the extreme of the Satanists,
Okay.
And but in many ways, apathy may even be worse, for reasons that I'll explain. But the Satanist is somebody who, they go to a mass, they get the Eucharist, and then they have these crazy black masses. But the only reason I say that they may not be as bad as the people who are apathetic about it is that the Satanists at least believe it's Jesus, because otherwise they wouldn't care. They wouldn't care. They wouldn't. So I think in many ways, in kind of a strange way, they're closer than somebody who's apathetic, because if you spend your life hating something as much as they must hate Jesus in the Eucharist, you're probably closer to believing it or having that big turnaround than somebody who just doesn't give a flip, which may sound kind of strange. You may not agree with that, but I think there may be some validity in that. Okay, so that's one approach. Thankfully, it's not many people. Not many people are Satanists and doing black masses and, trying to go to masses and capture the Eucharist and all that. But even like the demons in Scripture, they at least believed in Jesus, even though they hated him and were opposed to him. So that's one extreme example. The other one would be the people that just flat out reject the teaching of the Eucharist. They may not be Satanists and they're not, doing black masses and crazy stuff like that. But they've been told this teaching and they just don't believe it. They just reject it and, they don't have any faith at all. And then, as we mentioned, there's the people who receive the teaching and they're just like, whatever, and there's another category, which I think a lot of people fall into, is that they receive the teaching and it's like they're not apathetic, but they're going to Mass, they're receiving the Eucharist, they're going through the motions. They maybe deep down they're like, yeah, I guess I believe this, but it doesn't really make that much of an impact in their life, right? So that's another category. And then as we get to I think the more favorable categories, I think a lot of people fall into the category of they believe this. They believe in faith. They've been given the gift of faith, which is, supernatural, and they have a great devotion to the Eucharist. They believe it fervently, and they love Jesus. They love going to Mass. They love receiving him in the Eucharist. And that's that, okay? So, and the final category is the one that I think St. Thomas Aquinas fell into. He had that supernatural faith. He loves the Eucharist. He's receiving it probably daily. Of course, he was a Catholic priest, so he was saying Mass daily. But he also went one step further, and the step that I'm going to recommend during the show today is having not only the faith, not only the belief, the devotion, the fervor, the love for Christ, but also what I would call a holy curiosity about this sacrament, where you're pondering it, you're confused about it, you can't quite understand how can Jesus Christ be found body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, and so much that you're asking a lot of questions. And I mentioned the last few weeks as we've been talking about the Eucharist, that St. Thomas Aquinas asked dozens and dozens and dozens of questions, 8 of which we'll be going through today in this question 77 of Tertia Pars of the Summa. And they're interesting questions, and they're all based on what we're going to talk about in this first article, which has to do with the subject of the Eucharist, but I'll explain that in just a moment, okay? So if this isn't your bag, if you're like, I don't know, I fall into that fourth category, I love Jesus, I accept it on faith, but I don't know if I want to, dig that deep into it and ask all these questions and answer these questions, this probably isn't your show.
Are you trying to get people to leave us, Dave?
I'm just being honest with you, okay? Because I love to geek out on it. We all geek out on something.
Oh, sure.
I mean, Sissel, you geek out on a lot of stuff.
Do.
I mean, you like Formula One racing.
I do.
You like Korean food and music and all, and that's great. I mean, these are good things. But
I think everyone has an aspect of the faith that they particularly geek out on. And I do just think that St. Thomas Aquinas just geeked out on everything in the faith. You were saying earlier, like, St. Thomas Aquinas went one step further. And I was like, whoa, shocker. That could be his title, like the saint who went one step further.
Well, yeah, he probably went more than one step.
Yeah,
he
a
went,
couple steps further.
But I think he also was gifted with just an amazing intellect. And he, God gifted him that. But he could have used his intellect in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's a lot of really smart people that spend their time, wasted on really kind of trivial pursuits, so to speak. So, okay, so that's that. And I wanted to mention that. So here's the basis of what we're going to be talking about today is when you go to a Mass and, you get to that point of the consecration, which is the kind of the climax of the Mass, and the priest has bread and wine, they're on the altar with them. And by saying the words of consecration, he is able to confect the Eucharist and what the, let's just say the species that are there in front of him, what they are before he says the words of consecration, and what they are afterwards are two fundamentally and substantially different things. And it's fascinating to think about this, that at one moment you've got substantially bread and wine, and then a minute later, after these words of consecration, you have the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. But it looks exactly the same. Okay, so that's what we're getting at today. The title of this program is Why Do the Accidents Not Change? So that is a very long way of me leading into what are accidents. Okay, and I'm not talking about car accidents or anything like that. What is an accident? Cicely, you know this, right? I mean, when you hear about the accidents of the sacrament of the Eucharist, you know what that means, right?
I may not be the best at describing exactly, but my understanding is it. Oh no! Now every time I get put on the spot, I'm like, I think I do
You're
know,
like,
and then I
Teresita?
second guess myself on it. But wouldn't it be just like the accidents would be I'm trying to think about the physical elements of the Eucharist. So the host, what it is kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I were to say what are the accidents of Cicely Anderson, I'd say your height, your weight, your skin color, the color of your hair, what have you. Just different aspects. If you took any of those away. If Cicely was a foot taller or a foot shorter, or weighed 10 pounds less or 10 pounds more, had white hair instead of brown hair, she's still Cicely Anderson. Okay, so the substance of her is kind of like what she is. The accidents are non-essential physical aspects that are, as Cicely said, that are perceived by our senses. Okay, so when it comes to the accidents of the Eucharist. Let's just take the host because you have the bread and then you have the wine. The accidents would be things like its shape, its size, its taste, its touch, its texture, its smell. All these things that if it tasted a little bit different, it'd still be the Eucharist. If it was bigger or smaller, it'd still be the Eucharist. If it was darker or lighter, it's still the Eucharist. All right, so it's not the fundamental, essential aspects of it, but it's the things that we see and touch and taste. And the really cool thing about the Eucharist is that before the consecration and after the consecration, they don't change. It's exactly the same. And that's why a lot of people have a hard time really kind of believing that the Eucharist is real, that anything fundamentally changed in the Eucharist, is because it doesn't appear to be the case. Nothing really seems to change with the Eucharist before and after the words of consecration. All right, so that's kind of a lead into it. And again, if you are watching the program now on any of our social media platforms like YouTube and Facebook or Instagram, TikTok, and you want to comment, Cicely will be keeping an eye on the comments, and you can let us know what you think about it.
I got eagle eyes on them. Don't worry, guys.
All right. Last week we had Teresita in studio with us, and she was very brave to be talking about these deep topics related to the Summa Theologica. So there's 8 articles, and I have a PowerPoint presentation which is going to kind of highlight the particular questions that St. Thomas Aquinas was asking about this. And the first article kind of blows me away in a way. It's pretty deep, but I want to share this with you because it really kind of forms the basis of everything else that we're going to talk about when it comes to the accidents of the Eucharist. And what St. Thomas Aquinas asks is, he says, whether the accidents remain in this sacrament without a subject. Okay, so let me kind of summarize what he's getting at here. Okay, now think about this, is that you have bread and wine, okay, and that's something we can all understand exactly what bread and wine are. Okay, bread and wine, we've most of us have eaten, bread, and we've tasted wine, and we have a very good idea of what that is. So if you take that, and the substance of the bread and the wine is, the bread and the wine, and what you come to think about what it is, and you take that away, and then you add the substance of Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, the question is that Jesus is not like the bread, right? And Jesus is not the wine. So what you've done is you've taken a substance away, you've added something else. But what Thomas is saying is that there is no subject. Okay, and it's a very, very deep and difficult concept to understand. I'll let Thomas explain it, but I'm going to read this to you and see. So you tell me if this makes sense to you. Okay, he quotes Gregory, Saint Gregory, of saying that the sacramental species are the names of those things which were there before, namely the bread and the wine. Therefore, since the substance of the bread and the wine does not remain, it seems that these species remain without a subject. Okay, so one substance has been removed, and it becomes the substance of Jesus Christ, body, blood, and soul, and divinity, but there isn't really a subject there. And that's a really hard thing to understand. And when you're not as smart as St. Thomas Aquinas, it's really difficult to explain. But let me try to explain this. And if you're watching this and you want to let me know if maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 this makes any sense at all to you.
Send an SOS emoji or something.
Yeah, right. He says, okay, therefore it follows that the accidents continue in this sacrament without a subject. Okay, that is a really interesting idea. So we've already explained what the accidents are, right? The taste, the touch, the texture, the smell. Okay, so all these things that we can see. But what he's saying is that because the breadness and the wineness have been taken out of it and Jesus Christness has been added to it, there isn't a subject. There's a substance of Jesus Christ, but those accidents that we see don't have a subject. Okay, so they're kind of in a no man's land in a sense. And all the other questions that he's going to ask are going to have to do with, well, how can this be? Okay, and again, let me just read this and you tell me if it makes any sense to you, okay? He says, it follows that the accidents continue in this sacrament without a subject. This can be done by divine power, for since an effect depends more upon the first cause than on the second, God, who is the first cause both of substance and accident, can by his unlimited power preserve an accident in existence when the substance is withdrawn, whereby it was preserved in existence as by its proper cause. So he's saying that it's kind of a miracle that God is able to take the substance out of something and even take the subject out of it, because it's no longer bread and wine. And substantially, it becomes Jesus Christ, body, blood, and soul, and divinity, but it's left without a subject, okay? And so it's kind of like these floating accidents that don't have a subject, but so we're still able to see them, and then substantially it's Jesus Christ, body, blood, and soul, and divinity, but it doesn't have a subject. Does that make sense at all? I mean, I know it's really tough, and when you're, like I said, when you're not as smart as St. Thomas Aquinas, it's going to be very difficult, but it's like the accidents without a subject. They have a substance, it's Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, but Jesus is not the wafer. You know, the wafer and everything that you see is the accidents. The substance is something completely different, but there isn't a subject. Okay, I know. This is actually, when I was preparing this, it kind of made sense to me, but now as I try to explain it on the show,
Dave's like realizing how complicated it is.
Just how complicated, but it goes to show you just how intelligent St. Thomas Aquinas, because I'm sure he was like, yeah, I get this. He's probably up in heaven right now saying, this guy is really botching this. I don't know. If only I was the host of Back to the Father, St. Thomas Aquinas would say.
Just one more time, because for my own sanity, can you just define subject again? Just what it is, what we mean by subject.
Yeah, subject is going to be something different than the substance. And I'm trying to get my head on it, is that the accidents. Okay, let me back up. So matter and form come together and create a substance, right? So the matter is the physical aspect of it. The form is kind of what it is. Like our form is going to be the intellectual soul. And you have a substance, and that's kind of like what a thing is. Now, the differentiation between a subject and a substance is the key here, because what Thomas is saying here is underlying the accidents is a substance, and that's what actually the substance of the bread and the wine are going to become the substance of Jesus Christ, body, blood, and soul, and divinity. But the subject is going to be different than the substance. And I am struggling, as you probably can tell, to exactly differentiate what a subject is versus what a substance is. And that's the struggle here that I'm having.
I apologize for asking.
Oh, no. I appreciate it. No, because you asked the exact right question, because everybody who's watching this right now would say, I don't quite understand what the difference is between a subject and a substance. But that's the key.
That is the crux of the issue, isn't it? And I want to just really quickly shout out to our dying son on YouTube who says
he's back.
He's back.
He's back.
Pax Vobiscum, friends, is what he says, and peace be with you too.
How long has it been since our dying son has
been
been with us?
It's been a while, so we're glad that you're back with us. Thank you so much. And well, I'd be curious to know our dying son's thoughts on what the difference between subject and substance is based on this conversation, because maybe he has a better idea or some way to define it. I think it's just because it's so I don't know if we have quite the words.
Yeah, I know.
To describe it, the differences.
Yeah, and you know that's one of the things that, you know, like in the Summa, as you read it, there's going to be parts of it that make you think. You know, it's going to make you consider, like for example, what we're talking about right now. How can something have accidents which we can perceive and see and touch and taste, and then have a substance which changes from one thing to the next, while the subject of it doesn't change, or the subject of it, I should say, goes away. Okay, so the accidents of the bread and the wine, the subject of it is gone. Okay, it's like these floating accidents that don't have a subjective nature to it, but still there's a substance. Because remember when we said last week that the substance of the Eucharist is Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Right.
But when you take a host, for example, and you move it across an altar, it's not like Jesus is moving with it. Okay? Jesus doesn't move in the sacrament of the Eucharist. Jesus is bodily in heaven, but he's substantially in the Eucharist. But now what St. Thomas Aquinas is doing is he's making this distinction between the subject and the substance. Okay? And the best I can do, and I know it's not satisfactory, is to say that we have to say that the subject goes away. And so it's accidents without a subject, but still there's substance. Okay? And I know that's unsatisfactory, and I apologize.
That's okay.
And I wish that somebody else out there could explain. And maybe our dying son. Maybe
our dying son said substance is what the subject is made of, but that's not entirely right, or is that right? Substance is what the subject is made of.
A substance is what the subject is made. Well, no, when you say made of, that would be more like the material aspects, okay?
Yeah, that's true. That'd be
like if I, and again, this is kind of like
we're never going to be able to go on to any other article because we're so confused.
This is where if there was some kind of like the great philosopher or theologian out there who's listening,
I need a phone friend.
Yeah, so I've got a pen in my hand. And the material aspect of it is very easy to tell. It's a thing that I can touch and smell and look at, and it's made of plastic and ink and things like that. The essence of it would be penness, and the accidents would be obvious. It would be its shape and its length and its color. And if I were to want to actually taste this, it would, I guess, have some kind of taste, but smell and that kind of thing. Those are the accidents. But the substance of it versus the subject, okay? That's the key here. Okay.
Our dying son also really quickly said that they're delighted that they weren't forgotten and that we made the day.
You say they as in
because I actually don't know.
Yeah,
we were saying I'm sorry. We were saying he, and I was like, well, we don't know that, and so I was trying to keep it
right. You don't know if it's I'm pretty certain dying son is going to be because you don't know if it's a man or a woman
that's all
because
I'm saying.
son is S-U-N.
I didn't
right?
want to say it because that would be that's worse, Dave. So wait, really quickly, they also said, is the avatar? Is it like an avatar for the substance? Which, if are you familiar with what they're saying?
An avatar would be like a symbol,
kind of
or
like
something.
an icon. Kind of like when you you log on to maybe like a website okay, I know, Dave. When we are on like a Google Doc, sometimes you and I together, and you're not logged in, and it comes up with a little avatar for you, a little figure.
Yeah, like when Kent goes into our Teams meetings,
right?
And he has,
he's like, yeah, exactly.
What's that little character he has?
He has Dilbert.
Yeah, Dilbert. So that would be the avatar.
Yes, kind of think like that. And then our dying son also said, so the substance of the pen is its purpose.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean that like in a demeaning way, but no, purpose would be final cause. Okay, substance may involve purpose. Like, Aristotle said there are 4 causes: material, final, formal, and efficient, right? So when you look at a particular thing, it has 4 causes. You take this pen, material cause would be its matter. The final cause is its purpose, okay? So why did the Bic company make this pen? Okay, that would be its final cause. The purpose, I presume, is because they wanted to, sell it and make some money. But the purpose of it was so somebody could write. I mean, that's its purpose. The efficient cause would be who made it, and then the formal cause is what is it. Okay, so that would be the formality of it. Do you see we also had a comment from Ryan?
Yes, I was going to mention that.
Yeah,
Ryan on YouTube also said, in the case of Eucharistic miracles, is it the case that the substance and the accidents themselves change? That's a really good question.
Yeah, because, Saint, remember last week, and Ryan, thank you for the comment. Last week we were talking about that because Thomas actually asked the question. Remember he said, like, when a child or a face appears in the sacrament, does it? I would say without a doubt, accidentally, it's going to change when the bread and the wine turn into flesh, and it's like a heart muscle. Well, then that clearly accidentally changed because it's no longer the same accidental makeup that it was before. But the big thing that we're trying to figure out here is how can accidents remain without a subject while also at the same time having substance? Okay, that's the key, because and then this is when it gets really deep and really kind of interesting, is that can you imagine something that has accidents that doesn't have anything underlying it as far as a subject? Okay, because we can't quite figure that out, because accidents are always something that are non-essential to the nature of something. Like I mentioned, how tall she is, or what I weigh, or
which is on the high end of average for women, by the way, in the United States. My height.
Oh,
not that it matters, but like just as an FYI.
Well, apparently it matters enough to say it, right?
Sorry, continue.
So okay, so I am gonna, one thing I learned about teaching the Summa, and I teach it to high school kids, and very soon there's going to be some other avenue that I'll be teaching the Summa to adults, but that's all coming in the coming months, which we'll explain about. But when you get to a point of something that you're not 100% certain on, you just have to admit it, and you have to say, you know what, this is something that interests me a lot. But the point is that when you look at, you have to make a differentiation when you look at that, let's just say the host, okay? And the point that St. Thomas Aquinas was making last week is that substantially Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, is in that host. But that doesn't mean that Jesus Christ accidentally is round and, tastes like a host, like a piece of bread. So there's some subjective element to that is different than the substance. And what underlies those accidents, I think, would be the subject. So I'm trying to get around to this. So Cecil's very, very good question a moment ago is basically, what is a subject? Because if we don't get that, the rest of the ones, these articles,
I have a feeling
hate to say.
This particular subject is going to be a part 1, part 2, because we are halfway through the hour.
You said this particular subject. So
oh, no, I can't. This particular part of the Summa is going to take us a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And I want to real quick go back to our comments. Our dying son said, according to Aquinas, substances are what are primarily said to exist, and so substances are what have existence, but yet are not identical with the existence.
Okay,
and they said they don't get it. For the record.
And I think there's a reason
Thank you
why.
for sending the SOS.
I think there's a reason why our dying son just happened to come today, because, like we said, I remember our dying son. I'm just going to presume it's a guy, because it was months ago that he came in, and he always has interesting things to say. And maybe God just said, our dying son, Dave's going to need help today. He's going to be talking about a topic that's a little bit over his head. And so join us. And then, of course, Ryan is here as well. So we appreciate Ryan coming in and helping us out as well. So what I'm going to do is, Cecil, if you don't mind chatting amongst yourself for a second, I'm going to do a quick search online. And if you could just
chit-chat. I am all over it like a rat with cheese. I'm trying to think. I'm very curious. I would love to know, because we have a decent amount of people watching across all of our platforms. If you are confused, go ahead and just write, I am confused, in the comments. I'm curious to know who is watching right now, but who has stuck around because you want to learn a little bit more and you want to actually get unconfused, like me, because this is not a normal table conversation that I think most of us have. So this might be the first time you're even thinking about these things. So I would be genuinely very curious for everyone who's watching right now, if you could just comment, I'm confused, or I sort of get it, or this is the first time I've ever thought about this. We would just love to see some engagement, because that really helps. I think, Dave and I talk about and actually make it so that you can understand it.
Yeah.
Which currently it's not happening.
We're not doing. Okay.
But the idea being is that sometimes we can go on talking about things and maybe someone's like, I didn't really get that, but they didn't let us know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So okay. Let me read these couple lines and see if this clears it up at all. He says, even though, and this is Aquinas teaching in the Summa, even though it be according to the common law of nature for an accident to be in a subject, still for a special reason, according to the order of grace, the accidents exist in this sacrament without a subject on account of the reasons given. Okay, so they exist without a subject. And this is like totally boggling my mind right now to try to figure out what this is. And maybe by the time we come back next week, we'll have this figured out. You're probably thinking, well, maybe you should have had it figured out this week.
I'm not gonna lie, Dave, I did not have a great night's sleep, and now my brain is just very... I know tonight I'm going to wake up and be like... Wait. Substances.
Wait.
Subjects.
Wake up thinking about subject and substances. If you think about, okay, let's just use the example you gave a moment ago. You said, I think this may be a subject that we may need to cover more than 1 week, okay? So when you use that word subject, you meant like the overarching topic, kind of what are we talking about this week? What's the formal matter of the conversation? And so I think we might kind of know what a subject is. Like if you talk about the subjective element of something, it means it's coming from the person, their subjective perspective. And so, but anyways, I'm gonna have to go on. But I think that what we at least perhaps have come to realize is that we understand accidents, right? And accidents are not essential, and accidents also don't exist on their own. you can't, let's see, you can't have something accidental existing on its own. It's always like added on to something. And so maybe this helps us to get to the subject, is that the brown hair, the weight, the height, the skin color, these are all things that are part of a subject. Okay, maybe that helps out a little bit.
Our
okay?
dying son said like accidents are like properties of the substance. Would that again that and therefore they cannot change they can change without affecting or changing the subject.
Yeah, right. I mean, so if your hair turned red, or like I said, your weight went up or down 10 pounds, or your height went up and down 2 inches, you didn't change. Okay, the subject didn't change, and so the subject of Cicero Anderson. And so if you start to see that all these accidents come together to accentuate something that's there, that's the subject. Okay, now is it crystal clear now?
Clear as mud.
Clear as mud. All right, so I know there's some other people that are out there watching, and I apologize, but I'm gonna move on to article number 2, even though we're still a little bit fuzzy about article number 1. But
I'm fuzzy on a lot of things, to be fair.
The bottom line is you have to imagine that there are accidents that are existing without a subject. Okay, so that would be kind of like all these qualities of this pen, like the length of it, the color of it, the size, the texture, the taste, the smell, existing without there being a pen. I mean, it's like, let that blow you away for a second. I mean, so it's like the accidents are there, but the subject isn't. Isn't that crazy to even think about that? But then at the same time, the substance of the Eucharist is there. It's Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. Okay, so maybe this will help out. Article number 2, and I don't know, are you putting the
Yep,
power? Okay, putting the PowerPoint up there. Okay, thanks. Says whether in this sacrament the dimensive quantity of the bread and wine is the subject of the other accidents, and all this really means is the dimensive quality means the extension, kind of the how something extends into space. So if you see this plate, for example, Back to the Father, brought to you by Ifratelli's Pizza. No, you see that the extension would be the length of it, right? The physical size, but it's one of the accidents is how it extends in space. So all Aquinas here is saying that the other accidents are dependent upon the dimensive quantities of it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on from that one. And then the third article says that the species remaining in the sacrament can change external objects. So what Aquinas is confused about now is that if you're able to understand accidents without a subject, which was the basis of Article 1 that we spend so much time on, he's saying, well, how can these accidents without a subject still do things? Like, how can the sacrament, the species of what looks like bread and wine and still has the accidents of bread and wine, how can it change external actions? And he says here, if they could not change external bodies, they could not be felt. For a thing is felt from the senses being changed by a sensible thing. So imagine, God forbid, you put your hand on a stove and it's on, right? Well, that thing was able to change external objects because it changed your hand, right? Or you hold on to an ice cube and the ice cube is able to change you because it makes a sensation on your hand, right? So clearly the host and the wine can change you. I mean, if you drank enough of even the consecrated wine, you could become intoxicated, right? So it still has that quality about it. And how can this be? He says it's an effect of the divine power that the sacramental species continue in the being which they had when the substance of the bread and the wine was present. It follows that they continue in their action. So he's saying even though there's not a subject, even though it's only accidents without a subject, so by some miracle of divine, intervention, they are able to still do the things that they were able to do when they had a subject. Okay, I get the feeling that this is something that really boggled Aquinas, because it's boggling me to no end, and I think even to Aquinas, he's like, how can this happen? How can you have accidents without a subject, right? So, but what he's going to say is that these accidents are still able to do what they could do as bread and wine, even when they don't have a subject, because the subject has been removed when the bread and the wineness were removed from it. Okay, so I was thinking, what in the world are we talking about, huh?
Yep, basically, that's me. Most of the time. But I like that you're thinking that it was boggling St. Thomas Aquinas's mind, because
just
I think that
make myself feel better.
I was gonna say this must be the first time where this is boggling his mind.
Oh,
I feel very akin to him now.
No, I think there was that famous story when Aquinas was in the royal court. You know that story. I've told that before, haven't you? And he's with the king of whatever, the Roman Empire, whoever the king was,
whoever ruled the world.
Yeah,
then,
whoever ruled the world. It was because Thomas grew up in a pretty noble family, and of course he was very well known even while he was alive. So he's there, and he and all these people are having polite dinner conversation, and the king was there, and all of a sudden Thomas slams his hands on the table and he said, that'll show the Manichaeans, and everybody's like, what the heck?
Like, where are you
and
from,
so rather
sir?
than being offended, the king ordered one of his assistants to give Aquinas a piece of paper and a pen, because he realized he had just had some big major breakthrough. And the king realized that Thomas probably needed to write it down. So, of course, he was boggled by these questions, right?
Our dying son says, I think I'm more confused now. Thank you. Wait, I think that should be, can we use that as a review for our show?
Right.
Just like, I think I'm more confused now.
I love the tagline, putting the fun into mystic philosophy, but, if you come out of this program today saying, you know what, I may not have understood it because that host didn't explain it very well, but for the first time in my life, I'm thinking about the fact that an accident can exist without a subject. And if that's something that you ponder, and like Sissel wakes up in the middle of the night thinking about subjectivity and accidents, and if at Sunday at Mass, when you see the priest consecrating the Eucharist, and if it brings you a little bit deeper into trying to contemplate this mystery, and you're thinking about the substance and the subject of it, and the accident, and the fact that Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity is really present in that Eucharist, and your mind is kind of going in a lot of different directions, I think that's a win. I think you've entered into that final category that I talked about at the beginning of the program, where you're not only receiving this teaching on faith, which I think is sufficient. If you believe it on faith and you don't want to dig into the deep like we're doing in this program, God bless you. But maybe you want to. Maybe you want to go a little bit deeper than this,
By
right?
the way, our dying son, because I had written our apologies when they said that they're confused by, more confused now. I said, no need. That's the beauty of it. And it's not your fault, Dave, that St. Thomas Aquinas should have made it more clear for us. I agree.
I love that. Yeah, blame the dead guy.
Honestly.
Blame Aquinas, okay, who can't come here to defend himself. Okay, article number 4 says whether the sacramental species can be corrupted. All right. And, when you look at, the consecrated bread and wine, let's say, and this certainly would be a horrible thing to happen, but let's say a priest consecrated bread and wine, and then he did not ingest it, but he left it on the altar, and then he came back a month later. Okay. So clearly the what used to be wine is going to be sour, right? And what used to be bread, but now is without a subject, but still has the accidents of the bread, it would very likely have mold growing on it, right?
Right.
So the thing that Thomas Aquinas is trying to figure out is that how could this happen if it doesn't have a subject? It's just accidents without a subject, and how can it be corrupted? But again, it's through divine intervention that God allows something without a subject to still kind of act like it did have a subject and still kind of carry out the same qualities that it did beforehand, right? Okay, so let's move on because I know we're running out of time. I got 15 minutes. Can anything be generated by the sacramental species? And that's, again, the generation would be something like, mold growing on it or something that it could create. And the answer to that would be yes as well. And then this one is a little bit closer to home because Article 6 says whether the sacramental species can nourish. All right. And we know that they can. There have been some cases where people have survived on the Eucharist. Have you heard about these cases?
Yeah, I have.
People for decades, only on the Eucharist. And we know that, you've probably seen these masses where they have a lot of extra hosts around, and the priest wants to, and he doesn't want to leave them lying around, so he might ingest 5 or 10 of the hosts, or he might give them to his deacon or something like that. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Well, that nourishes. That nourishes as if it was bread. And of course, in a worst case scenario, and Thomas even mentions this in the Summa, if somebody drank, a quart of consecrated, let's just say what used to be the wine, the consecrated blood of Christ, well, they would get intoxicated. So it still has the same function that it did back when it was wine and back when it was bread, right? So that's kind of what he's getting at. It can still nourish. It can still have the same effect. But again, what's Aquinas thinking? Well, how can it do this if it doesn't have a subject, right? That's why I said, unfortunately, if you don't understand the first article, these other ones are going to kind of fall flat. And of course, that's my fault. But if you ask our dying son, he'd say it's Aquinas' fault. But yes. I tend to not think that's the case.
Really quickly, going to some comments. Ryan on YouTube said, there's an article written by Christian B. Wagner who defends the non-inherence of accidents in transubstantiation, who explains the distinctions that are vital in understanding it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that'd be really good, I think, for us to look into.
I'm curious, Ryan, and you can tell us this or not, but you seem to be a cut above, as I would say our dying son is as well, a cut above the rest when it comes to this kind of stuff. You're no dummy. And why did you show up on the show today? Because I don't remember seeing you with us before, and I'm beginning to think that God in his great providence sent us a couple of bright people today to help us to work this out. So he said, Christian B. Wagner defends the non-inherence. See, there's a good expression, non-inherence of accidents in transubstantiation, so that they don't inhere in the subject, okay? Because there's no subject through which they are to inhere. Do you know what inhere means? Maybe. Do you mind looking that up real quickly? Just kind of maybe get a definition of inhere and what exactly that means. Because I think that's going to get us a little bit closer to understanding how something can have a substance but not a subject.
Okay.
How can there be substance in the consecrated bread and wine and not a subject? But we will get to that in just a moment. But Ryan, thank you very much. Okay, so while you're looking that up, Cecil, I'll just read our dying son's comment. He says, is there an exact moment when the bread and wine stop being bread and wine? Yeah, that's a really good question to ask, because last week we talked about this, how can Jesus Christ be in the consecrated species of the Eucharist? And my understanding is that there is a moment, when the priest says in the words of Jesus, "This is my body," boom, it happens. Now, the question that Thomas asked last week is, he said, okay, but the "this is my body" and "this is my blood" are said at different times. And he had the interesting comment that blood is part of the body. So if the precious blood of Jesus has already the wine do you remember concomitance? He said that when the host is consecrated, it has the body of Christ through the power of the sacrament, but concomitantly, almost like as an add-on, it also contains the blood of Christ, right? So how can the blood of Christ already have been converted when the wine has not yet been given the words of consecration, if that makes sense, right? So it's a long answer to your short question, our dying son, but yeah, I do think that there is an exact moment when those words are said that the change happens. And it's a fascinating teaching, isn't it? I mean, again, this is why I'm willing to struggle and stumble and fall over this stuff, because I at least want to ponder this mystery. I at least want to try to figure it out. And even if it's totally inadequate, which I think the last 51 minutes have been, at least it's fun to ponder these questions.
Yep.
Inherence?
Yes. So I went on quite the rabbit trail on the Merriam-Webster because it kept saying, you kept using the word in the definition, and I was like, stop doing that. So finally,
the dictionary's doing that?
it was using variants of the word inherent, which is like the root word of it, and it kept being like, inherence is inhering to, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's unhelpful. So this is what I found finally with inherent, the adjective, which is involved in the constitution or essential character of something, belonging by nature or habit, intrinsic.
Okay. So involving the essential. You used the word essential. Okay.
Yes, essential character of something.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go on a little bit of a soapbox here for a moment, and I want to know what those who are watching right now, if you agree with this, and you as well, Sissel, is I think that when if I was the head of the Department of Education, which I don't even know if it still exists or not, but and you're going to educate children. I think when they're in about second or third grade, you need to have a course where you teach fundamental terms that have to do with not only philosophy of life, but, for example, what is an essence? What is a form? What is matter? What is accidents? What is subject? How much that would have helped this show, because it's, and then in the four causes that I talked about with Aristotle. Imagine if you get that fundamental lesson early in your life, and then as you go about experiencing the world, you can understand the difference between essence and form and matter and how it relates to all of your experiences in life, and how much that would help. Because, we get into, CCD and we learn that, sacraments have form and matter, but most people don't even know what this stuff means in the first place, and so it's very confusing. All right, end of soapbox. Article 7, whether the sacramental species are broken in this sacrament. He says that many opinions prevailed of old in this matter. Some held that in this sacrament there was no breaking at all in reality, but merely in the eyes of the beholders. But this contention cannot stand, because the sacrament of truth, the sense of not deceiving with regard to its object proper of judgment. So you see oftentimes, in fact most times, during Mass, you'll have a host, and you've seen the priest break it, But if you thought that host in its physical aspect was Jesus, and I think maybe this touches on the difference between substance and subject, is that obviously it's breaking, but that doesn't mean Jesus is breaking in half, right? Jesus is not breaking in half, but the species of the sacrament, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, is going to say that, yes, clearly these things break in half, because he says, breaking arises from the division of that which has quantity, but nothing having quantity except the sacramental species is broken here, because neither Christ's body is broken as being incorruptible, nor is the substance of the bread, because it no longer remains. Oh, man. Okay, so finally, Article 8, whether any liquid can be mingled with the consecrated wine. And, you notice that during the Mass, and we've talked about this before, but it's just kind of review, there's always a little bit of water that's added to the wine, right? You've seen that. But if you notice, you'll see that the priest takes great pains to not put a lot of water in.
Right.
And I've always wondered, in fact, sometimes you even see they'll block the little flow from with their thumb so that, literally like a drop or two that goes in. And something tells me that when they're in seminary, they are taught you can't put a lot of water into the wine. Why? Because the accidental qualities of the wine must remain, and if you put too much water in, it's no longer going to be wine because it's been diluted. If you have, let's just say, an ounce of orange juice and you add a gallon of water, just to use an extreme example, you don't have orange juice any longer. Whereas when you had that ounce of orange juice, it was pure orange juice. It doesn't matter how much it was. But the water diluted it to the point where it was no longer orange juice. So if you have wine and you put too much water in, it's no longer wine, and that means it can no longer be consecrated into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, because you can't consecrate water into Jesus Christ. And so that's why I think it's very key that a very, very small amount of the water is put into it. So, Sissel, I know there are a few other comments.
Yep. Let me really quickly catch us up here. Let's see. Our dying son said church wine is the best, which is something that a lot of people will say.
What, you mean like taste-wise?
Yeah, taste-wise. A lot of people who don't like wine, I find, really like the wine that they use at parishes.
But what about the fact that it doesn't have a subject?
That I now think that you have made the taste of it more confusing to everybody. And then Ryan also says, back to when you were talking about education, Dave, and the importance of kind of starting these things younger. Ryan says, I agree. Modern education gives us the impression that the physical sciences describe the fundamental nature of reality, thus prompting the young mind to believe in some sort of crude materialism.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Even, and again, a little bit of a rabbit trail, and I know we got to wrap this up, but if you think of, you've heard of the pre-Socratic philosopher Pythagoras. Pythagoras was all about numbers. But there's this interesting thing, and I think kids ought to be introduced to these kind of concepts, is that a number, can you think of the number 8 without thinking of 8 things? I mean, can you abstract a number away from things?
Octopi?
like, can you think of 8 but not 8 things? Just the concept of 8. Or is 8 always going to be attached to 8 things in your mind? It doesn't matter if it's 8 dogs or 8 cats or 8 lines. And again, it's more of a
sure.
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question. You don't have to necessarily answer, but it's something that, like, put those kind of thoughts in kids' minds, because then they begin to think abstractly. They begin to think about the relationship between a concept like a number and the physical association that we have. Because when you think about 8, can you think about 8 as an abstraction, or 3 or 2, or is it always associated with something, and 8 of those things? Okay, I'm going to leave you with that little mind-boggling question for this one. I do want to thank our dying son and Ryan very, very much for your comments and your help. And I'll just say that this is kind of what I've always envisioned the show to be, is not just me teaching, concepts of Thomistic philosophy, but just kind of discussing this stuff. And even if we don't come to any kind of conclusion, we've expanded our minds and we've thought about something that maybe we otherwise wouldn't have thought of. And so kudos to you two awesome folks who commented and really helped the show to be better today. And Sissel Anderson, without her, it'd just be not be back to the Father. It'd be,
of course not.
Well, what did Keith say? Back to the Friday?
Yeah, that was an accident. He said he meant he's promoting, and he's like, join Cecil and Dave on Back to the Friday.
Back
and
to
I'm
the
like,
Friday.
we are on Friday, but that's not quite right.
I think I like that title better.
Right? We wouldn't confuse it as much with Back to the Future, I think. Also, really quickly, Dave, do I have permission to rename the show to Cecil and Dave being confused and confusing everyone for an hour straight?
No, that doesn't roll off the tongue. I know that's not quite as good. All right, thanks everybody. We have a show next Friday. Yeah, I think so.
We should have a show next
God
Friday.
willing. God willing, the creek don't rise. We'll see you next Friday. Going into the next question, and I hope I explained that one better than I did this one. It's going to be the form of the sacrament. Okay, the form, the words, okay, which affect a change. God bless you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.